Dr. Whitmore had always been respected in the medical community, admired for his precision and knowledge, but behind closed doors, an insatiable curiosity gnawed at him, a desire to challenge the finality of death itself. He began reviewing medical texts on resuscitation and anatomy, searching for any method that could reverse life's inevitable end. His office, once orderly, slowly filled with notes, sketches, and theories that no other doctor dared consider. The obsession consumed him quietly at first, unnoticed by colleagues who continued to trust his judgment implicitly. Late nights became his domain. While the hospital slept, Dr. Whitmore moved silently through the wards, observing patients with a strange intensity. He studied heart monitors, charts, and post-mortem procedures, noting every detail. His mind raced with ideas that skirted the edge of morality, each thought a dangerous step into unknown territory. When a patient passed away, he felt both grief and exhilaration, a twisted mix that propelled him toward the first forbidden experiment. The night of his first act arrived suddenly. A patient, elderly and frail, succumbed to illness despite the best care. Dr. Whitmore's heart pounded not with sorrow, but with anticipation. He requested the body be left in a secluded room under his supervision. No one questioned the need for discretion. The doctor's reputation allowed him privileges that others could not obtain. Behind locked doors, he prepared his tools and notes, the dim light casting long shadows that seemed to echo the darkness of his intent. As he began his examination, he documented every reaction, every subtle change in the body. Each movement of muscle or flicker of reflex was noted with obsessive care. Dr. Whitmore's hands trembled, not from fear, but from anticipation. The thrill of stepping into forbidden knowledge coursed through him. He whispered theories to himself, as if conversing with some unseen presence that understood the gravity of his actions. For the first time, the line between life and death felt fragile, manipulable, and terrifyingly real. Hours passed as he continued his work. The room, isolated from the hospital's routine, became a private theater of obsession. Dr. Whitmore's mind was consumed with possibilities, imagining a world where death was no longer absolute. He tested rudimentary methods on the body, careful yet audacious, documenting the results with meticulous precision. Each step forward felt monumental, a defiance of nature itself. The doctor was exhilarated, yet a creeping unease whispered that he was venturing into territory no human was meant to tread. By morning, he had concluded his first session. The patient remained still, but Dr. Whitmore saw potential in every minute reaction. The obsession that had driven him for weeks now solidified into a relentless pursuit. He knew that he had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. Ethical boundaries, once guiding principles of his profession, were now obstacles to overcome. The thrill of discovery had replaced compassion, and with it, a dangerous path had begun. Word of unusual behavior began to circulate among the hospital staff. Dr. Whitmore remained outwardly professional, his impeccable demeanor hiding the storm within. Nurses and colleagues noticed late-night absences and whispered conversations, but none dared question the doctor openly. The secrecy of his first experiment fueled his confidence. Each hidden action reinforced the belief that he could manipulate life and death without consequence. The obsession, once quiet, now grew bold and insatiable. As the weeks progressed, Dr. Whitmore's mind was consumed entirely by the possibilities of his forbidden experiment. He no longer thought in terms of patience or ethics, only in terms of results and discovery. His obsession had taken root so deeply that every waking thought revolved around defying death itself. The first act, conducted in secret, had set the stage for a descent that would endanger not only him, but everyone within the hospital walls. Each step forward brought him closer to the ultimate, terrifying knowledge. The unused wing of the hospital, long abandoned and shrouded in shadows, became Dr. Whitmore's sanctuary. Behind locked doors, he transformed sterile corridors into a labyrinth of tables, instruments, and shelves stacked with medical texts and vials filled with unidentified substances. Each night, he meticulously prepared the space for his work, ensuring that no curious eyes could penetrate the secrecy. The air was thick with the scent of chemicals and antiseptic, a warning that something unnatural thrived within these walls. Bodies, previously patients under his care, were discreetly moved to the hidden lab. Each one was catalogued with obsessive precision, their vital details recorded in journals that filled the shelves. Dr. Whitmore's fascination with the fragility of life pushed him to study every muscle, vein, and organ, mapping reactions as if each corpse were a puzzle to solve. The line between science and obsession blurred completely, and every experiment fed the insatiable hunger for forbidden knowledge. Assistants, handpicked for their skills but unaware of his true intentions, began to notice irregularities. Extended hours and unexplained procedures raised questions, though few dared confront him. The atmosphere in the lab was tense. Whispers of odd practices circulated among the staff, but the reputation of Dr. Whitmore silenced most objections. Fear and awe kept them compliant, even as unease grew. Each assistant sensed that the work being done transcended normal medical ethics. Dr. Whitmore's experiments became more elaborate over time. He used delicate instruments to probe responses, studying subtle twitches and reactions in ways that no medical textbook suggested. Charts and graphs filled the walls, documenting each anomaly with rigorous detail. While outwardly methodical, the work carried a sense of ritual, a meticulous choreography born from obsession. The audience begins to see the depth of his ethical collapse and the dangerous precision of his actions. The secrecy of the lab was absolute. Doors were reinforced, windows shuttered, and only Dr. Whitmore knew the full layout of his hidden wing. Staff attempting to enter without permission were met with cold, intimidating authority. Each warning strengthened his control, isolating the lab from any potential interference. In this isolation, his obsession flourished, and the experiments advanced unchecked. Every night, he pushed further into territory where morality no longer existed. Strange occurrences began to unsettle the few who glimpsed the lab's inner workings. Notes detailed experiments that seemed impossible or grotesque, and assistants reported witnessing methods that defied natural limits. Even those loyal to Dr. Whitmore felt a growing chill, as though the wing itself held secrets it was unwilling to release. The tension thickened with every day, signaling that the hidden world of the lab could not remain concealed forever. Dr. Whitmore became increasingly paranoid about exposure. He monitored the hospital closely, noting every question asked and every glance that lingered too long near the forbidden wing. His behavior became unpredictable, oscillating between charm and menace. The assistant's unease grew with each passing hour, and a sense of inevitable confrontation began to form. The narrative foreshadows that secrecy cannot hold against human curiosity forever. The hidden lab had transformed from a simple experiment space into a fortress of obsession. Dr. Whitmore's work was no longer a study of medicine. It was a command over life and death, conducted in isolation and secrecy. The audience understands the magnitude of his moral descent and the lurking danger his obsession poses, setting the stage for suspenseful developments that will draw others into his dark pursuits. Dr. Whitmore prepared the operating room with meticulous care, his hands steady despite the gravity of what he intended. The patient, long declared dead, lay on the table, their body cold and lifeless. Every instrument, every chemical had been arranged with obsessive precision. As he began the procedure, a flicker of hope shone in his eyes. Hours of careful stimulation, electric currents and experimental compounds were applied, each step measured to coax life back into the still form before him. The anticipation was suffocating, as if the air itself held its breath. Then, slowly, the patient's chest rose in shallow gasps. The body twitched unnaturally, responding in jerky, unpredictable movements. Doctor. Whitmore's heart raced, a mix of triumph and disbelief coursing through him. Yet, as the patient opened their eyes, a cold void seemed to stare back. The recognition and warmth that once filled their gaze were gone, replaced by something alien and unreadable. The success was undeniable, but so too was the terrifying difference in what had been returned. He observed every movement, every twitch, jotting notes with feverish energy. The patient's speech was fragmented. They repeated phrases out of context, recalling events that never occurred and confusing friends with strangers. Their personality had shifted, leaving behind a hollow echo of who they once were. Dr. Whitmore, enthralled by the scientific breakthrough, failed to see the moral abyss into which he had stepped. The room vibrated with the silent horror of his achievement. The assistants, who had watched in hushed tension, were both fascinated and horrified. Some whispered that the patient seemed almost inhuman, reacting to stimuli with an eerie detachment. Yet none dared challenge Dr. Whitmore openly. The lab had become a place where boundaries of morality dissolved under the guise of discovery. The audience begins to feel the creeping dread of consequences too vast to ignore as the line between life and abomination blurs. Dr. Whitmore continued the observation, testing reflexes, administering small stimuli, noting how the mind responded in fragmented patterns. With each experiment, the patient's altered cognition became clearer, a stark reminder that life returned was not life as it had been. He marveled at the data, blind to the suffering now embedded in the body before him. His obsession began to outweigh caution, and the first whispers of real horror entered the story. Outside the lab, the hospital staff noticed irregularities. The patient's absence from standard care raised questions, but the secrecy surrounding Dr. Whitmore's work prevented intervention. Rumors began to circulate among the assistants, though fear kept them silent. The audience sees how isolation and secrecy feed the escalation of danger, and how the doctor's obsession isolates him from any moral restraint, setting the stage for further horror. By the night's end, the patient remained alive but unrecognizable, a vessel of Dr. Whitmore's ambition rather than a human being restored. The room, though quiet, carried an oppressive weight, as if acknowledging the unnatural act that had occurred. Each moment of triumph carried a hidden cost, the ethical and emotional consequences already taking root. The first experiment was both victory and curse, a duality the doctor failed to fully comprehend. Dr. Whitmore's excitement overshadowed any apprehension. He saw the results as a breakthrough, proof of his genius. Yet the audience feels the chilling reality. Life had returned, but something essential had been lost. The partial success marked the point of no return, igniting an obsession that would escalate unchecked. The horror was no longer theoretical. It had taken tangible form, leaving both the doctor and the audience suspended between fascination and terror. Whispers began circulating through the hospital corridors. Nurses exchanged uneasy glances when patients who had recently been under Dr. Whitmore's care behaved unpredictably. One patient screamed at shadows that weren't there, another attacked staff without provocation, and a few displayed strange, jerky movements that defied medical explanation. The tension grew as the anomalies became harder to ignore. Visitors, sensing something was wrong, murmured in hallways, their eyes wide with fear. The hospital, once a place of healing, started feeling like a house of secrets. Dr. Whitmore maintained an impeccable facade. To the administration, he was a dedicated professional, courteous and methodical. Yet behind closed doors, he manipulated patient records, altering charts to hide irregularities and labeling incidents as isolated medical oddities. Staff who dared ask questions faced veiled threats and cold dismissal. His authority and charisma allowed him to deflect suspicion, leaving only fragments of doubt in the minds of the more observant nurses and doctors. The sense of unease grew like a shadow over the hospital. Visitors and patients' families began noticing subtle changes that couldn't be easily explained. Children once calm now cried inconsolably, speaking incoherently of visions they claimed to see. Adults described loved ones who no longer seemed themselves, their eyes hollow, their speech fragmented. Even simple interactions carried a sense of wrongness, an unsettling disconnect between body and mind. Fear spread quietly, like a virus, as the consequences of Dr. Whitmore's experiments became impossible to completely hide. Staff meetings became tense, with some members quietly raising concerns to the administration. Yet the hospital board, impressed by Dr. Whitmore's past accomplishments and fearing scandal, hesitated to act. Rumors of unnatural recoveries and bizarre patient behavior were dismissed as exaggerations or hysteria. The audience begins to grasp how authority and reputation can shield horror, even as the ripples of his experiments start disturbing the entire institution. Suspicion was growing, but still contained, like a spark before a fire. Small incidents escalated into undeniable events. A patient once pronounced dead now moved in the ward under Dr. Whitmore's supervision, behaving in ways that frightened everyone. Medical staff tried to rationalize what they saw, but each explanation seemed less plausible than the last. Fear began to infiltrate even the most skeptical, leaving doctors and nurses questioning their own perceptions. The consequences of meddling with life were no longer theoretical. They were visible and tangible, casting a shadow over every floor of the hospital. Even visitors whispered among themselves, sensing an invisible tension. The hospital, a symbol of care and trust, was becoming a stage for something unthinkable. Patients' altered behaviors, combined with Dr. Whitmore's secretive demeanor, created a chilling atmosphere. Staff began avoiding certain wings, leaving corridors unusually empty. Anxiety gripped the hospital, and the audience can feel the building itself teetering on the edge of disaster as curiosity and fear collide. Dr. Whitmore's manipulations began to unravel subtly. A nurse caught him reviewing records late at night, the flicker of concern briefly visible on his face before it was replaced by calm authority. Small inconsistencies, overlooked at first, were beginning to accumulate. The seeds of exposure were planted, even if no one yet dared confront him. The audience sees the growing tension, the precarious balance between secrecy and revelation, and the inevitability of the truth clawing its way to the surface. By the end of this chapter, the hospital is a place of silent dread. The consequences of Dr. Whitmore's experiments ripple beyond the secret lab, touching staff, patients, and visitors alike. Fear mixes with curiosity, and the first inklings of public suspicion emerge. The story moves inexorably toward confrontation as the veneer of normalcy cracks and the hidden horrors threaten to emerge, leaving the audience on edge and eager for the next revelation. Dr. Whitmore's once orderly notes devolved into a chaotic mixture of symbols, formulas, and frantic observations. Nights blurred into days as he scribbled incessantly, his mind consumed by patterns only he seemed to understand. Each successful revival, no matter how flawed, reinforced his delusion that he was transcending human limits. Patients once familiar were now twisted reflections of themselves, and yet he viewed them as milestones rather than warnings. The laboratory became his sanctuary and prison, a place where obsession replaced empathy, and every heartbeat was a reminder of his dangerous ambition. The revived patients grew increasingly unpredictable. Some displayed violent outbursts without provocation, tearing through their restraints or lashing out at staff. Others remained unnervingly compliant, following Dr. Whitmore's instructions with a hollow precision that suggested a mind no longer entirely their own. Each interaction added to the doctor's distorted perception of mastery, blinding him to the growing terror around him. The line between life and experiment blurred, and those around him began to sense that the consequences would be irreversible. Staff whispers escalated into fearful avoidance. Nurses and assistants tiptoed around the laboratory, exchanging nervous glances, but daring not to challenge him directly. Even those who once admired his brilliance began to feel unease, as if the very air of the hospital carried the weight of unseen horrors. Dr. Whitmore remained oblivious, convinced that any objection stemmed from ignorance or fear, not understanding. The descent into madness became visible in the shadows, and the audience witnesses a mind unraveling under the weight of obsession. As his moral compass disintegrated, Dr. Whitmore rationalized increasingly extreme measures. He justified experiments on the recently revived, claiming it was necessary for scientific progress and the advancement of human mastery over death. Each justification tightened the chains of his delusion, reinforcing a belief that he alone could decipher the secrets of mortality. Those who questioned him were dismissed, threatened, or manipulated into complicity, and the danger surrounding him grew in parallel with his obsession. Hallways of the hospital began to feel less like safe passages and more like corridors of suspense. Reports of strange behaviors, sudden collapses, and unexplained recoveries became harder to ignore. The audience can sense the growing tension as Dr. Whitmore's obsession threatens not just the lives of patients, but the stability of the entire institution. His detachment from reality became a storm, drawing all who encountered him into a vortex of fear and uncertainty. Even the revived patients contributed to the escalating dread. Some seemed aware of the unnatural bond they now shared with the doctor, while others reacted violently to the slightest stimulus, as though a foreign consciousness controlled them. Dr. Whitmore interpreted each reaction as a step closer to mastery, unable to recognize the damage inflicted upon their minds and bodies. The terror is psychological, both for the audience and the characters, as the consequences of playing God unfold in real time. Isolation and paranoia consumed Dr. Whitmore entirely. He trusted no one but his own calculations, retreating further into the hidden wing of the hospital. Nights were spent observing, manipulating, and documenting, until he began speaking aloud to the revived, as if they could understand and advise him. Reality and fantasy merged, and the hospital became a stage for his unraveling psyche. Every action reinforced the sense of looming catastrophe, and the audience feels the mounting tension with each passing moment. By the end of this chapter, Dr. Whitmore's descent into madness is complete. His obsession has transformed the hospital into a landscape of fear, uncertainty, and moral collapse. The revived patients are no longer mere experiments. They are symbols of his hubris and the dangers of tampering with life itself. The stage is set for confrontation, chaos, and revelation, leaving the audience on edge, fully aware that the next chapter will escalate the horror to its breaking point. The young nurse Clara had joined the hospital full of hope, eager to make a difference. She was diligent, observant, and quickly noticed inconsistencies in patient files and behaviors that didn't add up. It wasn't long before she suspected that something far darker was unfolding in the hidden wing. Late nights, she watched Dr. Whitmore work, recording his every move in secret. The patterns were unmistakable. Each revival left patients more broken, more controlled, and more unpredictable. Fear mixed with determination, as Clara realized she might be the only one who could stop the growing horror. Clara began documenting her observations meticulously. She noted the times patients were revived, their altered behaviors, and the cryptic experiments Dr. Whitmore conducted. Each entry in her hidden journal became more alarming as the consequences of his obsession were laid bare. She realized that these experiments were not isolated incidents. They were part of a larger, systematic tampering with life itself. Her hands trembled as she connected the dots, understanding the magnitude of the danger and the urgency to act before more lives were irreversibly damaged. Risk weighed heavily on Clara. Reporting Dr. Whitmore could ruin her career, endanger her life, or worse, provoke retaliation from a man whose brilliance concealed his madness. Yet she could not stand idly by as the horrors continued. Every moment she delayed, the hospital's secret wing consumed another victim, another soul manipulated by the doctor's unrelenting obsession. The tension grew unbearable, and Clara knew that exposure was the only chance to save not just herself, but the patients trapped in the twisted cycle of life and death. The first step was subtle. She discreetly contacted hospital administrators, presenting anomalies in patient records and strange observations. Her reports were cautious, never naming Dr. Whitmore outright, but detailed enough to provoke concern. At first, her superiors dismissed her warnings as paranoia, emphasizing the doctor's respected reputation and decades of service. Clara understood their hesitation, but refused to back down. She knew that facts alone might not convince them. Action had to be taken before irreversible damage occurred. Dr. Whitmore, however, was not blind to disloyalty. Subtle changes in staff behavior, whispers, and furtive glances alerted him to Clara's growing scrutiny. His fascination with control and secrecy turned quickly to suspicion, then to targeted intimidation. He questioned her, mocked her observations, and subtly threatened her position. The tension between secrecy and exposure escalated, creating a psychological battle that gripped Clara, testing her courage and determination against a man who wielded power and fear as weapons. As Clara pressed forward, she discovered the extent of his manipulation. Even hospital records had been tampered with to obscure the unnatural recoveries. Witness accounts from other staff members were missing or altered. The nurse realized that the only way to stop Dr. Whitmore was to gather irrefutable evidence, photographs, notes, detailed timelines, and proof of the patient's altered states. Each discovery reinforced the stakes. The danger was immediate, and failure would have consequences far beyond her imagination. Clara's courage inspired subtle support from other staff who had quietly observed strange behaviors but feared retaliation. She coordinated discreetly, gathering corroboration without alerting Dr. Whitmore. The web of secrecy surrounding the doctor began to fray as Clara's meticulous records threatened to expose him. The audience sees her rise as a determined force of morality amidst madness, creating suspense and anticipation. Every revelation raises tension, highlighting the fragility of control in the face of ethical courage. By the end of this chapter, exposure feels imminent. Clara's evidence, combined with growing staff awareness, sets a ticking clock for Dr. Whitmore's obsession. The doctor, sensing the threat, grows increasingly desperate, foreshadowing a dangerous confrontation. The audience is left on edge, aware that the next chapter will escalate the stakes, with the balance between revelation and catastrophe hanging by a fragile thread. Dr. Whitmore meticulously selects the patients for his final experiment, each chosen for specific qualities he believes will ensure success. He works late into the night, preparing intricate apparatuses and administering experimental compounds with precision. The hidden lab is a scene of eerie anticipation, every detail calculated, every step executed with obsessive care. As the patients lie unconscious, the air grows tense, carrying the weight of what is about to unfold. This experiment is not just another trial. It is the culmination of years of obsession, ambition, and moral compromise. The revivals begin, and at first, Dr. Whitmore believes he has succeeded. Patients stir, their vital signs stabilizing, and for a fleeting moment, triumph fills the lab. But the victory is short-lived. The revived exhibit behaviors that are unpredictable, disturbing, and sometimes violent. Their eyes, once familiar, now reflect confusion and alien consciousness. Some speak in distorted voices, others react to stimuli in ways that no longer align with their former selves. Whitmore's triumph is shattered, yet he remains consumed by the need to complete what he has begun. As he observes the outcomes, Dr. Whitmore's calculations become frantic. He tweaks procedures mid-experiment, convinced that minor adjustments will correct the anomalies. Each failure drives him deeper into obsession, ignoring the cries of staff and the evident suffering of the patients. The line between scientific pursuit and personal madness blurs completely. His moral judgment collapses entirely, replaced by a dangerous conviction that he alone can master the forces of life and death. The staff, previously complicit out of fear or curiosity, can no longer remain passive. Some attempt to intervene, pleading for the experiments to stop, but Whitmore's authority and obsession render their protests meaningless. The revived patients, some aggressive and some eerily compliant, amplify the chaos. Each action he takes produces unintended consequences, escalating the horror around him. The lab becomes a scene of panic, dread, and the tangible consequences of defying natural order. Dr. Whitmore's obsession reaches a peak as he tries to administer a final series of compounds designed to stabilize the revived. The results are catastrophic. A patient convulses violently, another mutters incomprehensible phrases, and a third remains motionless. A stark reminder of mortality he cannot conquer. The consequences of his interference are undeniable, yet he refuses to surrender, pushing further into peril. His fixation has overtaken reason, leaving him isolated and blinded to the devastation around him. Witnessing the horrors unfold, Clara and a few remaining staff realize that the only way to stop him is direct intervention. They plan carefully, knowing that confronting Whitmore could endanger them as much as it might save the patients. Each action carries weight as they navigate the labyrinth of the lab filled with machinery, experimental setups, and unstable subjects. The tension escalates, balancing the threat posed by Whitmore's obsession with the urgency to end the nightmare before more lives are lost. The patients' reactions grow more extreme. Some attempt to flee, others lash out at the few staff who dare approach. Whitmore, completely consumed by the experiment, fails to recognize the imminent danger he has created. His perception of reality is fractured, seeing only the possibility of success rather than the devastation surrounding him. The audience witnesses the ultimate consequence of unchecked obsession as the experiment spirals beyond control, creating an atmosphere of inescapable horror. By the end of the chapter, the stage is set for confrontation and collapse. The final experiment leaves the lab in disarray, patients unstable, and Whitmore teetering on the edge of madness. Clara and the staff prepare for a decisive act, knowing the moment of exposure and reckoning is at hand. The narrative tension peaks, leaving viewers aware that the culmination of obsession will have irreversible consequences, driving the story toward its terrifying conclusion. The authorities arrive at the hidden wing with full force, confronting Dr. Whitmore as he frantically tries to protect his work. Equipment is smashed, chemical compounds are scattered, and the revived patients react with chaos, some attacking guards, others wandering in confusion. Whitmore's calm facade shatters completely, revealing the depth of his obsession and the danger he poses. Every attempt to restrain him is met with resistance, as if the doctor believes the law cannot touch him or his pursuit of defying death. Amidst the turmoil, hospital staff scramble to secure the patients and contain the destruction. The revived, unstable and unpredictable, create a scene of terror and confusion. Some retreat to hidden corners, others confront anyone nearby with strange aggression or incomprehensible speech. Authorities struggle to differentiate between the living, the altered, and the dead, as Whitmore's experiments have blurred every boundary. The chaos underscores the unforeseen consequences of tampering with life. Dr. Whitmore refuses to abandon his work, frantically attempting to continue experiments even as the lab is raided. He manipulates machines, adjusts equipment, and tries to revive subjects still moving, ignoring commands to stop. His words are incoherent, but filled with obsession, revealing a mind consumed by his single goal. The authorities are forced to act decisively, shutting down the lab and removing any remaining subjects from his control. The doctor's defiance heightens the sense of danger. Bodies and notes are confiscated, catalogued and sealed away, but the true horror of Whitmore's work cannot be fully contained. Each document hints at experiments that challenge morality, reality, and the natural order. The authorities and staff realize that what they are witnessing is more than criminal activity. It is the aftermath of tampering with life itself. The magnitude of his obsession leaves everyone unsettled, unsure if any of the revived could have lingering, uncontrollable effects. In the chaos, Dr. Whitmore disappears without explanation. Surveillance shows him slipping past guards, vanishing into the night, leaving behind his experiments, notebooks, and the unstable patients. His disappearance adds a layer of dread. If he survived, he may continue his work elsewhere, somewhere beyond observation. The lingering fear is that the knowledge and methods he developed are still active, threatening new victims. The sealed wing becomes a scene of eerie silence after the raid. Authorities and staff meticulously check equipment, bodies, and records, documenting the horror, but the impact of Whitmore's work cannot be erased. Survivors of the revived patients are sent to controlled care, yet their altered behavior hints that not all consequences are known. The lab's closure marks only a partial resolution, as the events and outcomes defy simple containment or understanding. As the dust settles, the staff reflects on the scale of what occurred. Dr. Whitmore's obsession has permanently changed the hospital and everyone involved. Even after containment, the ethical, scientific, and supernatural questions raised by his experiments remain unresolved. Rumors circulate about patients who behave strangely in other parts of the hospital, suggesting that Whitmore's influence may extend beyond the lab. Fear and uncertainty hang over the institution, reminding all that some experiments cannot be undone. The story closes with the haunting possibility that Dr. Whitmore continues his work somewhere unknown. The raid marks only a temporary stop, leaving the audience with chilling questions about the limits of life, the consequences of obsession, and the fragility of morality when faced with power over death. The collapse of the lab resolves the immediate threat, but leaves an enduring mystery. What horrors remain in the world as a result of one man's ambition to master life and death? Years after the hospital raid, whispers of Dr. Whitmore's legacy continue to circulate. Former staff speak in hushed tones about files and vials that vanished during the chaos. Patients who were altered in his experiments are rumored to appear in distant towns, their behavior strange and unsettling. No official records confirm these sightings, but the tales persist, fueling fear and speculation. The shadow of his work lingers, a reminder that obsession with defying death cannot be fully contained. Occasionally, fragments of Whitmore's journals emerge, often in obscure auctions or forgotten archives. Researchers who examine them report unease, noting cryptic calculations and diagrams that suggest methods far beyond accepted science. Even the most rational experts feel a chilling sense of dread, as if the knowledge contained within carries a curse. The legacy of horror is compounded by the ambiguity. Nothing is certain, and every discovery raises more questions than answers. Some survivors of the revived patients are rumored to adapt in bizarre ways. Their altered memories, uncanny skills, and unpredictable behavior hint at the extent of Whitmore's meddling. Communities encounter them without understanding their origins, and the encounters are unsettling, as if glimpsing a life tampered with beyond comprehension. These stories reinforce the notion that Whitmore's influence extends far beyond the sealed lab and continues to unsettle the natural order of life. Medical authorities debate whether any part of Whitmore's work should be studied or permanently destroyed. Some argue that understanding the experiments could prevent future disasters, while others insist that tampering with life carries too great a risk. The debate itself is a reflection of the lingering moral questions. How far is too far when confronting death? And should knowledge ever outweigh ethical boundaries? Whitmore's shadow challenges the very essence of scientific morality. Even in the absence of the doctor, his influence is felt in hospitals and research facilities. Rumors suggest certain anomalies in patient behavior could be linked to undisclosed experiments inspired by Whitmore's methods. Colleagues who once supported or ignored his work report a sense of unease, as if the past refuses to stay buried. The story demonstrates that the consequences of obsession do not end with the person but ripple through time, affecting countless lives. The most unsettling aspect is uncertainty. There is no evidence that all of Whitmore's materials were accounted for. Secret notebooks, vials, or even patients may still exist, hidden from public knowledge. The possibility that someone could find and attempt to continue his experiments keeps the fear alive. Even after decades, the horror is not theoretical. It is a persistent shadow that reminds society that tampering with life is never fully reversible. Legends emerge among those who studied the case, glimpses of altered humans in remote areas, mysterious disappearances, and inexplicable medical phenomena. These accounts blur the line between truth and folklore, leaving communities unsure what is real. The audience is invited to question the boundaries between life, death, and the unnatural. Whitmore's legacy is a cautionary tale, showing that some ambitions leave permanent scars on the world. In the final reflection, the story leaves an enduring sense of dread. The lab may be closed, the doctor may be gone, but the ethical, scientific, and supernatural consequences of his work remain. The audience is left with a chilling thought. Some horrors do not end. They evolve, linger, and continue to haunt the living. Dr. Whitmore's legacy of horror persists, a dark reminder that defying the natural order comes with consequences beyond comprehension.